Good morning, good afternoon, everybody. Fantastic to be on this webinar, and thank you to the Green Economy Coalition for inviting us to make this very important presentation. Today, I shall be talking about the value of natural capital and how we can begin to put not just a biophysical value on natural capital, which we've been doing for quite some time, but also a dollar value and an economic value on natural capital. And the importance of placing a dollar value on natural capital is even more important today in the post-COVID recession and economic recovery, because we are aware that our efforts to manage natural capital has been dismal over the last 150 years. Economic theory and economic history does not give nature even a small place as a factor of production, and that has to change. And unless we, proponents of sustainable development, make some drastic moves in this direction, we will continue to not value natural capital at the peril of society at large. May was the warmest year on record, reports the International Panel on Climate Change. There were wildfires in Siberia. So if you don't get hold of climate change and biodiversity loss, we can kiss goodbye to economic progress altogether. So rhetoric aside, how have we been working to place an economic value on natural capital? And I'm going to show you an example of what we did on the Saloum Delta, which is a World Heritage Site. And we began with conversations with local municipalities, Wetland International, national agencies in charge of infrastructure development, the Ministry of Economy and the Ministry of Finance, in making them begin to realize that the wetlands of the Saloum Delta, which is a World Heritage Site, itself presents economic value. And the methodology we use to conduct this valuation is called the Sustainable Asset Valuation. The web link is in the slide. It is a simulation methodology based on project finance and systems dynamics. And the gift that SAVi brings us is that we are able to place the asset, in this case, the natural capital, which in this particular case is the Saloum Delta, in the middle of the system, the biophysical system, the economic system, and the social system. And we are able to simulate 60, 70 years into the future how that system will be affected by a multitude of economic, social, financial, and climate scenarios. So how did we organize this evaluation? I would like the audience to know the numbering, because the numbering will be replicated in the slides coming up. We began by asking, what are the ecosystem services provided by the wetland ecosystem of the Saloum Delta? Then, what is the labor income enabled by these services across the following sectors that rely on the wetland ecosystem: agriculture, forestry, fisheries, industries, including tourism, and services. Then we began by examining what is currently spent to maintain the Saloum Delta today. What is the government spending? What are the municipalities spending to maintain the Delta today? And then we wanted to compare the costs and the revenues achieved by the ecosystem services with built infrastructure. So we wanted to get at the hypothesis that if you had to build infrastructure to achieve the same services as the Saloum Delta, how much would we have to spend? And the results are fairly compelling. And the first slide, number 1, that you're looking at now, shows the results of the simulation on the value of ecosystem services, showed in SAVi, and these are billions of SAVi. And note the colors of the bar charts. We have up to 2030 simulation and up to 2060 simulation. And we have a multitude of colors showing you the values for nitrogen removal, tourism, water filtering, avoided social costs of carbon, coastal erosion, edible plant collection, and biodiversity. So taking your attention to the maroon bar, which is the highest, we see that the ecosystem services provided by the wetland in preventing coastal erosion is significant. This is very important because there's significant erosion along that part of the coastline in Senegal, mainly due to sand mining, sea level rise, and oil drilling. And then the next highest bar perhaps is the water filtering services provided, pretty high. The numbers are pretty high. And the next highest might be water supply. And then bearing these numbers in mind, if we look at the labor income delivered by the different sectors, the labor income that is directly derived because of the Saloum Delta. We have some numbers here on the screen, and no surprise, or is it a surprise that we see agriculture coming first and forward? For those of us who are not economists, labor income might be simplified as what is the total wage earnings enabled by, in this case, the Saloum Delta. And then we see over the next 40 years that agriculture continues to be particularly a significant winner in the broader spectrum, and fisheries, forestry, and other services, for example, tourism, are much smaller in comparison. The fact that the tourism contribution isn't so big in this case is particularly telling. Then we look at how much it would cost to deliver ecosystem services with built infrastructure. And here we'd like to point out that we have a current data gap, that we were not able to get any data from the local municipalities or the national government on how much is being spent to manage the Delta today. This is not a surprise. We will find this all over the world where governments work on a budget, and therefore they deploy the budget, but they have no real grasp of how much infrastructure maintenance or ecosystem maintenance actually costs. So a very important problem which we'll have to address in the years to come. But here coming back to the subject, here we see that if we had to build a wastewater treatment plant to deal with the nitrogen load that we're seeing, that the ecosystem of the Saloum Delta absorbs, we will be spending considerably more. We also see fair benefits in carbon sequestration. we're unable to get to the flood protection because we don't have the necessary data. And then we look at the costs combined. We see that over the next 40 years, that the income enabled for the Saloum Delta in itself makes a very compelling case for the continued preservation of the Saloum Delta. Stakeholders are able to appreciate that there is definite dollar values, there's a definite economic benefit to maintain the delta. Now, on top of this, we began to overlay, because this is a simulation exercise after all, and when you're simulating, you can do weird and wonderful things. On top of this, we began to overlay a couple of scenarios. And the scenarios now are shown on the slide. So we simulated a scenario in sustainable agriculture with the ambition to convert 20%, a little bit more, of additional land to organic agriculture by 2030. So that's the scenario we simulated. Similarly, we added a scenario on mangrove reforestation. Then we had a rather funky scenario where we thought about additional tractors that could be used to improve agricultural productivity, and we pulled the scenario from the regional development plan. Road expansion is actually ongoing. These are the budgets that are earmarked to be spent on road expansion in and around the Funduin area where the delta is. And then we built in a very realistic scenario. There is offshore oil drilling just beyond the coast of the Saloum Delta. And it is very realistic to expect spills to occur. And we have simulated what we see as an average spill in this type of oil drilling infrastructure to occur over every 3 years, and the spills, of course, will be affecting the stock of healthy mangroves. And what do we see when we overlay these scenarios? We see what we're calling a Saloum Delta Wetland Quality Index. And what we're seeing is towards 2032 to 2040, that there is a significant degradation of the Saloum Delta, mainly related to oil production, but that all things being equal, the wetland will recover to a certain extent. Nature is very resilient. However, while we're looking at this slide, if we just remember the slide that we've just seen on the value of the ecosystems services being provided, one is asking, is there anything we can do to actually prevent the degradation of the Saloum Delta? Because as we see this slide, we realize that oil production is causing a certain amount of degradation, and that means that we are losing very valuable ecosystem services. What is not shown on this slide is, of course, the revenues and royalties that the government and people of Senegal are earning from the oil drilling. So it's a question of trade-offs. Are we ready to sacrifice a given value of ecosystem services to economic activity over a limited number of years? Question mark. All the numbers are presented here for those of us who want to give it a closer scrutiny. A point I want to stress on are the numbers in red. These are very important numbers, but for us to get at these numbers, we need to begin with baselines available in the public domain, or baselines that would need to be provided to us by the stakeholders in question. And unfortunately, we were not able to get these numbers. Of particular relevance is perhaps the zeros that we have featured in terms of oil revenues. We were not able to find in the public domain or through stakeholder consultation the exact value of the oil revenues that the government and people of Senegal are receiving. This is very important for us to take this analysis further as the sustainable development community and compare what is the dollar value of the oil revenue compared to the dollar value of the ecosystem services. The chances are that the dollar value of the oil revenues will be much higher than the ecosystem services, but the ecosystem services cumulatively over the next 60 years is delivering perhaps significantly more value. That comparison is where we need to go as we advance the debate on natural capital. Here's a slide on all the avoided costs, again, for those of us who want to look at this closer. And some of us might be asking, so this is great, Oshani, that, great analysis. What are you going to now do with these numbers? And this is what we are currently doing. We are in talks with several impact investors, several nature-based infrastructure project proponents. We are talking to the GGGI, the Green Growth, the GGGI, I forget, the Green Growth Institute. And we are talking to Wetlands International and the Marva Foundation on looking at some of the following innovative financing strategies to raise capital for the continued conservation of the Saloum Delta. Firstly, we're looking at the idea of carbon offsets. You would remember, I hope, the fairly significant potential for the Delta to provide carbon offsets. So we are looking at how an offset arrangement might be set up and who might be the current buyers of offsets. The next option we are looking at is how can we set up a pay-for-performance-based financing arrangement? Who would be the outcome pair and who can house a special purpose vehicle to house such an outcome-based financing initiative? Thirdly, we're looking at if we could replicate some of the ideas around mitigation banking in the USA, where project developers and industries that cause the degradation of wetlands can do a direct offset by financing the regeneration of wetlands in other parts of the world that provide the exact or a higher value of ecosystem services that they are indeed removing from the global environment. So we are looking at options around that. We are also talking to the local municipalities and to the national government about national asset inventories. We see movements in corporate accounting and public accounting that allowed natural capital to be registered as tangible capital assets. And this is a massive move, because the moment public authorities can recognize on their balance sheet natural capital as a tangible capital asset, there's a lot less incentive for them to sell it off or fill up a wetland area and build housing or real estate on it. So we are looking at this space, and we are in conversation with local municipalities. And then we are also talking to a range of startups and technology providers to begin a pay-as-you-go solar cook stoves initiative in and around the Delta, on the premise that if the local communities, mainly agrarian communities, have access to solar cookers, they will stop the deforestation of the mangroves. And the main reason that they deforest is to harvest fuel wood for cooking. So that's a roundup of the ongoing work on the Saloum Delta. The idea is to provide us with an example of how we can begin to place economic and financial values in natural capital. And this is the first step towards improving our dismal efforts at conserving natural capital as we look towards sustained economic development and, above all, sustainable development. Thank you very much to the Natural Capital Coalition and the Africa Forum on Natural Capital for giving us this opportunity. Check out the SAVi website and drop me an email with questions. Thank you so much.